Welcome to the Transport Leaders podcast, where we discuss the breakthrough ideas and bold solutions transforming the future of transport around the world. Join a global community of transport leaders, professionals, academics, and advocates as we unpack transport's toughest challenges and spotlight strategies driving real change, from system reform levers and political realities to sustainability. Join us and our guests as we offer expert perspectives as we discuss ways to transform our transport system. G'day, I'm Graham McCabe. I'm founder of Step Advisory, a transport planning and traffic engineering firm, and I've worked in consultancy and government for over 25 years across Australia and Asia.
And I'm Russell King. I'm the founder of the Transport Leaders blog and newsletter, and I've been involved in transport policy for around 20 years.
Okay, Russell, what are we going to talk about today?
I think
Politics 101.
Yeah, I think we're going to talk about how can we help politicians to become better transport decision makers.
Okay, and when we were having our pre-discussion, I said I would pretend to be the politician, and that you were, doing the giving me the briefing book, and you said no, that's terrible. You'd make a terrible transport minister because you know a little bit too much. I would say I have opinions more than knowledge sometimes.
Well, I think you touch on a really important point, actually. And I think a really good place to start is understanding where most politicians who become ministers for transport or in charge of transport, their starting position. And the vast majority of politicians who end up in the roles of the Minister for Transport do not have a background in transport. They do not have a background in engineering. They have got involved in politics for very different reasons. Sometimes it's because they're passionate about causes like social justice. Sometimes it's their real passion is things like economics, and they see themselves as wanting to be the treasurer in the future, or those sorts of things. But politicians, some of them, really just want to represent their community. They're in it for good reasons, but they do not come from an experience or an understanding of transport or an interest in transport typically. The ones that do are an exception. So the vast majority, you have to start from a very low base.
So politicians come in. Let's just say they are a community member who got annoyed at what their local council was doing, and got into council, then decided that they actually liked making change. So went from a local council to being elected at a higher level, so a state, regional government or a federal government. They've social climbed their way up the ranks internally. They've schmoozed all the right people in the party, and their reward for getting the numbers or getting lots of donations is the transport ministry. So they're coming in there, overlooking, a beautiful harbour or river or something like that, and you have to go in and go, well, Minister, what's your opening line?
So I think it's important to, before you kind of get to your opening line, is what is going to be their experience and understanding of transport to date. Okay.
Most recently, it'd be sitting in a car being driven by somebody else.
Yeah, but also they will have had issues raised on the doorstep with their constituents about transport. The vast majority of those engagements, though, in the vast majority of places, will be congestion related.
Traffic's terrible. What are you going to do? It takes me 10 minutes to get out of my neighborhood. The freeway's stuffed. I can't use public transport. It's too hard.
Yes. And because they don't have any transport experience, and concepts like induced demand are counterintuitive, their perception that you're starting with is not neutral in the sense of they don't understand roads at all, and that they're open to completely being told what to do. They will be coming from a starting position of the answer to congestion is to widen the road. Okay, similarly to the vast majority of the public. Okay, how do you ease congestion? Make the road wider. So that is their starting position. Now, that means that you are already on the back foot. So then you've got to start thinking about who are the people that are going to be advising the minister. And this is where you really need to be thinking strategically about your senior leaders. And I've written previously about one of the challenges we have is in the transport space, we need to make a lot of change for a lot of reasons. There's a lot of things that are wrong in how we do transport, right? And how we allocate money and how we do projects and all sorts of other things. There's a lot of issues that need to be tackled. In order to tackle those and understand them, you need people at the senior levels of the transport bureaucracy who understand transport.
Oh, that's controversial. We're getting rid of all of those, aren't we? We don't want technical experts. Technical experts get in the way of.
Well, interesting. Yes, exactly.
Delivery.
So what's interesting is that. So I'll give you an example I found out this morning. The UK's Department for Transport a few months ago appointed a generalist into the head of the transport department. Now, can you get away with a generalist in the department at the head of a department of transport? Possibly. But if you're going to have a generalist in charge, and I've written a blog about why generalists don't really work in transport, but if you're going to have a generalist in charge, make sure they are supplemented by a whole bunch of people who really understand the subject matter and can effectively advise the generalist. Because
hang on a second. When you say generalist, you're not talking about generalist in terms of their understanding of or experience in transport. You're talking about somebody whose background may just be purely in management or communications or economics
they're coming from a different policy expertise typically, right? So the way a lot of our civil service public services work is there's a kind of generalist senior public servant kind of role, okay? And the thinking goes that these people are smart, they've got experience of coming up the ranks, they know the right questions to ask. Unfortunately, in the transport space, a lot of the questions that we need people to ask are counterintuitive, which means smart people will not answer those questions. You need people who understand the system to ask the right questions. Now, can you get away with a generalist at the head of a department of transport? I think you can, but that generalist has to kind of get their head round that they need to basically be listening to the technical experts who are getting them up to speed. And to be honest with you, until they've got their heads around transport, which best will in the world will be minimum of 6 months and probably several years, right? They shouldn't really be making many transport decisions.
That's not how the reality of politics. So if it's a newly elected government, they've come in on some form of platform.
So I'm not talking about the politician here. I'm talking about the.
I know, but I'm saying if you have a new politician comes into power and appoints a generalist, then you have two people who don't really have any technical knowledge or understanding. One of who may have a 3, 4, 5 year political driver in terms of they want to get things done, they want to be seen by the community to achieving things. So there's a very much disconnect. You're saying that they shouldn't be doing things for 6 months while they actually get to understand things, but 6 months in a 3-year cycle or a 4-year cycle doesn't leave much time for actually doing things.
So, sorry, just to be clear, I'm not saying you don't make decisions. I'm saying the person who makes the decisions, in a sense, right? So if you've got somebody who comes in, who's a generalist in charge of a Department of Transport, right? In the current world we live in, there'll be a whole bunch of road projects coming across their desk.
Yeah.
Do they really have the smarts to ask, the knowledge, the background knowledge to ask the right questions about whether these roads are going to deliver induced demand or not? And for a generalist, the answer is no. And that's the challenge. So you've therefore got to have people who understand those things in roles instead. Now, what the UK Department for Transport has just done is just appointed two very senior roles, one of them which is, I think, the head of transport strategy for the Department for Transport, and the one for the head of roads. Okay, neither of those people are transport experts. They're both generalists coming from different departments within the civil service. So they now have three senior leaders in the Department for Transport with very little transport experience. Right? That is not a recipe for success when you are looking to change dramatically the direction of travel that needs to take place in the Department for Transport in the UK. Right? So if you're looking to build a lot less roads and do a lot better job on public transport, and the UK outside of London is pretty shockingly bad by international standards. Like, so if you compare the UK's second cities in terms of public transport compared to, say, Germany or France or Spain or Italy, it's a lot worse. And that, and then there's a lot of debate in the UK about, is that one of the reasons why they have a big productivity problem in their secondary cities? Because what that means is it limits people's ability to access jobs within those cities because the travel time just becomes too problematic. And so there's a whole bunch of productivity questions, but we'll get off the subject. The challenge here is who you need to have a team of people who really understand transport, advising, and getting ministers up to speed who are not experts as well. Now, of course, one of the things that's really important in doing that is that you need to understand what the department's position is and have a consistent position. And one of the problems we have is departments often do not have a consistent position on induced demand, for example, right? So you've got a whole bunch of people who are road and traffic engineers, okay, who are perhaps come from an older generation, maybe, okay, and have built lots and lots of roads and extra lanes and still think that's the answer to congestion, right?
Well, and there's also lobby groups whose sole role is to try and make that happen because it's a good way of making money.
Well, let's put aside, I mean, lobby groups, have an impact, but in terms of your departments, they're supposed to provide technical, advice and expertise, right? But in order to provide high quality advice and expertise, they have to have their ducks in a row in terms of understanding, what their position is on different aspects. Okay, that doesn't necessarily mean that doesn't change the government's position. So if the government's position is building roads is the right answer, okay, and the department understands induced demand and everyone's on board with that, that's fine, because the politician ultimately makes the decisions and can say, well, that's fine, but I'm going to build roads anyway, okay, and that's fine. But I think if you're going to be, providing advice to the minister, you need to have your ducks in a row. Otherwise, you can't provide advice because you've got, well, this silo over here says, building roads is the answer, and this silo over here says building roads is not the answer. So the result is you don't provide any advice on anything.
Yeah. So
you've got to have your core agency. You kind of have to get your ducks in a row on that. Otherwise, there's a vacuum, and if there's a vacuum, the default is that the politicians' understanding, quite rightly, will fill that vacuum, and that understanding will be build more roads to solve congestion. So that's actually a fundamental problem, okay, if you have an agency that doesn't have a position to be able to advise the ministers.
So getting back to the core of the issue. So incoming minister, what's the first thing that you would say to them?
So one of the
because you can't really sit down and do an hour-long education on induced demand.
No, so the first thing, one of the key lenses on this is, it is the role of the public service and the civil service to support ministers with their agenda. Okay, so the thing is, whether you are coming in from opposition or whether you are a minister replacing an existing government minister, okay, the government now will have an agenda, okay, in terms of what it's trying to achieve in transport. Sometimes it will be, an explicit, we're going to be doing congestion busting and here's a bunch of new roads that we've promised. Okay. Sometimes it's more vague than that. Okay. And it's just kind of like, we're going to deliver a better transport system that's more sustainable and equitable. And, it means that people spend less time in congestion and they're less prescriptive in terms of the solutions. They just effectively come up with a bunch of objectives that sound very nice and virtue signaling, but they don't really have a clue on how they're actually going to deliver on it. Okay. And I think that's probably where most of the positions are if you're coming in from opposition. If you're already in the government, you've already committed to a whole bunch of projects. Okay, so so the government's already been in place. You're replacing an existing minister, so you have a whole bunch of projects in train that will be, some of which will be good, some of which will be not so good. Okay, and really what you're trying to do is to say, Minister, here's where you are in terms of the projects that we've got, or here's how we're meeting the government's piece. So what you're trying to do is build a relationship with the minister, okay, in terms of getting them up to speed on what's already happening or what you're going to change and do in order to support their manifesto election commitments.
So what if okay, let's take the example of a newly elected government. So manifesto says we will widen all these roads and turn them into arterials to support low density greenfields development because it's becoming too difficult for people who are moving into these areas to drive. So that's something that's obviously initially very popular with the community.
Yep.
That it's addressing. We know it doesn't work in the long term, and in fact embeds car dependency even when the eventual congestion will be disbenefiting all those people.
Yeah.
How do you go about having that? Well, do you have a courageous conversation with the minister, or is that something where you build up slowly over time once you've built up a rapport with the minister?
It's a very good question. So on something like that, I wouldn't be having the conversation on day one for certain, and I would be looking to build a relationship on more constructive ground. So you're building a relationship and investing in that relationship, so you're building the trust. I think it's the thing I would also say is you don't want to be in a position, and I think it's wrong for a position of a public service or to come out and say, Minister, you've committed to this project in your manifesto. It's going to be a disaster. You shouldn't do it. Kind of position. I think that's not quite the way to frame it.
No, of course not. It's being simplistic. But you're like you said, what things are you doing to build that trust in that initial period?
Yeah. So I think I'll park that a second. Let's just finish the thread around the example that you gave, and then go back to the trust things, right? So I think then the thread is really what you're trying to do with the other example is then come up with, here's a sort of solution if we just go with the traditional build an extra lane minister, build a new road, etc. Here's an alternative plan B that will deliver better results for the community in the short, medium, and long term. Okay. It's not 100% exactly aligned perhaps with what the manifesto commitment was, but it basically is solving the underlying challenge that people want. And I think at that point, if you've got a trusted relationship, a minister will reflect on that, and they may decide, I think I can take the community with me on this alternative solution. Right? So if it's a kind of extra lane, but you've kind of come up with here's an alternative solution. It's a multimodal solution, minister. We're going to provide lots better active, walking and cycling paths and a dedicated bus lane. And here's how we're going to help manage the cars, etc. in the space. Okay, we think this will deliver a better outcome for all these reasons. I think that if a community, you can take the community. I think you can take the community with you. Option, and there are ways of politically doing that for a minister to do. Okay, while staying within the spirit of what they've pledged to do in their manifesto.
Okay, so that gets us through, that particular project of identifying ways to, I suppose, influence the outcome. So you're saying, yes, we're delivering on your manifesto, but along the way, here's some other things that we can include in the project.
So let's talk about the building trust piece. Okay. So the building trust piece, I think there's a combination of things that you need to be doing. So first of all, you need to be proactive about what is on their agenda. So if you're a new government coming in, they've got to hold an agenda. You say, Minister, this is what we're going to be doing about all the things that you're going to be doing. These are the actions we're going to be taking, okay, to immediately get these things moving. You want to be on the front foot. Okay. The other thing I would say is that's useful is to have a conversation around, Minister, we have a few things that were perhaps have some challenges in them, projects that have some challenges. We'd like you to get you up to speed on those challenges. What I would call that would be the bring out your dead strategy. Okay, so one of the things when I was working with a minister was we said to the department, here's an amnesty, effectively, okay? Right, new minister in charge, here's an amnesty, okay? Bring us all your problems, okay? And the reason for that is that you don't want to be in a situation when there are problems on staff, if you haven't had that amnesty early on, what happens is those things get buried within the department, but they eventually get surfaced. Somebody leaks something to the newspapers, or so a critical issue comes up through a freedom of information or something like that. And so what you end up doing is playing defense a lot.
Yeah.
Okay. And so your whole agenda gets pushed by just be reacting to whatever the next leak is. And once things start leaking, they continue to leak in that space as well. One of the advantages we had was by bringing out your dead, we basically went around fixing problems. I mean, I literally spent the first 6 months, every day was almost a WTF or an OMG day, right? Because we were just dealing with stuff that was buried within the department. But because we've given them an amnesty, there was a whole bunch of stuff coming out that we could work on and tackle. And what that meant was it was very good from our perspective, because people who had been honest with us, it helped build trust from our perspective. They've been honest about their problems, etc. But it also built trust the other way around, because we didn't shout at them when they came out with their challenges. What we did was we worked with them constructively on how to tackle those challenges. Okay. And what that meant was that moving forward, one was vastly fewer people hid stuff from the minister's office or buried them in the department, because they knew they could come to us with genuine problems and we wouldn't shout at them, which is always a useful thing to have. From our perspective, it meant that we had a group of people that we knew, weren't being economical with the truth with us. There are a few that weren't honest, etc. And that was really damaging for the relationship with the minister's office for those people.
So without obviously, lots of things are confidential. Can you give examples of the types of, I suppose, behaviour? Was it to do with projects or process, or
more often than not,
second guess what the minister wanted?
More often than not, it's projects, right? And so it would be something going wrong. So it could be the specification of, a project. The project has problems with it, so it's not going to deliver on the benefits that you want, or there is cost overruns or project delays that are not kind of widely known at that point. Those sorts of things.
Right.
Okay. Or it could be something I think that comes out very commonly, but is kind of buried, is your assets are deteriorating because asset management is not going well, and it's not being things are not being properly maintained, and it hasn't reached the point yet where the reliability has deteriorated to such a point where it's become a crisis, but you're heading in that direction because you're not doing your maintenance properly. Right? Does that give you a flavor of the sorts of things that you really want to be having conversations with about, with your new minister to deal with?
So is there a level of fear of delivering bad or challenging news to ministers? Or if I'm showing my age, I used to watch Yes Minister and Yes Prime Minister as a child. Very well worth of public servants having a look at. And the minister's head of department would say, well, that's a very courageous decision, Minister.
So
have we gone the opposite way, where the advisors or bureaucrats are afraid to put the minister in a position where there would have to be a courageous decision of declaring to the community that something has not gone awry, so they withhold the information and then actually make the situation worse?
So I think there's a combination of things here. So the default phrase that you hear a lot from the public service is frank and fearless advice. Right? And I personally, I find that phrase a little bit too crude, because I think how you provide that and deliver that advice is as important as providing the advice. Okay? And if you can do it, and so there's really different ways of presenting that advice, and to some extent it depends on the temperament of the minister. So there have been some high profile instances I've seen where that the minister has a short fuse.
Yeah.
Okay. And others where it's a much more constructive piece. And sometimes I think in the in the Australian context, we have much more, ministers' offices are much more political. I've got lots of political appointees in them. That's not true in other jurisdictions as much. And sometimes it's you inform the chief of staff, or you inform one of the senior advisors in the office of a problem, rather than the minister directly. And then it's a kind of, how do you, then there's a conversation to be had about who's going to inform the minister and tell the minister, right?
Yeah.
And I kind of got, the messenger can often be as important as the message in getting the right decisions made off the back of it.
So let's dig into that. So I'm the bureaucrat. It's like, this $2 billion project's going to now cost $2.8 billion. We've discovered contaminated land, and the project timeline is going to blow out, and the project won't be ready before the next election.
Yep.
Russell, Minister's policy advisor, can you help us out with how we have this discussion? I guess you had that type of thing quite often.
This problem sounds very familiar. Yes. So the thing I would say on those is the first thing to understand is the revised figure credible? Okay. What you don't want to be doing is, admitting that you've got a budget increase and, a time delay, making that apparent, and then 6 months later saying another delay and another budget increase, right? So the thing I would say is the first thing to understand is how have we got into the position that we've got into, okay, in terms of why have we ended up with this increase? Why have we ended up with this delay? Okay. And are we really confident that this is it? This is going to be the last delay and this is the last peak? Because if you're going to have to come clean on a delay and a budget increase, okay, you want to do it once, right? You don't want to have to do it again and again and again. So you're trying to understand. So one of the things you've got to go is, right, why is this project going all right? And often 9 times out of 10, I would say it is because the original scoping stage was rushed, right? So we've gone into delivery far too quickly.
Yeah.
Right. And so you've got a whole bunch of assumptions in your project, which as you go through your project, you find that those assumptions are not right, and the timeline and the budget was based on those assumptions being relatively rosy, and that's not the reality.
So is it getting back to the education piece and the short political timeframes that occur in a lot of places? Can we be successful in educating ministers in thinking slow, acting fast? So doing all of that groundwork, having a good project so that when we, break ground, you don't have the cost blowouts, you don't have the time delays, you have a project that's well thought through, delivers the outcomes, and if you're using early contractor involvement or whatever method, once they start constructing, there's a very firm timeline. The costs are pretty well understood. Whereas, politicians, love having a shiny object that they can stand in front of and make an announcement about.
Okay, so there's different aspects here. Okay, so let me give you one example, right? When one of the things that I knew that we would want to do would be, prior to the next election, we would want to commit to a major transport project. Yep. Okay. Now, there are examples of jurisdictions where that major transport project has basically been created and designed within a minister or a premier's office, right, at election time, in order to win votes, and they've drawn lines on a map to sort of like, here's a whole bunch of marginal seats, we'll promise them this transport project, and they'll all be happy, and therefore we'll win the election, kind of stuff. Okay. And that's a disaster from a transport planning perspective, right? It's kind of like short-term political benefit, but at the long-term expense of the transport system. The way we did it was quite early on in our term. We asked them, we got advice from the public service about what the right projects should be in terms of new commitments, and therefore what we had time to do was work up those projects properly, so that and this was the theory anyway, was that come election time we could make the commitment having done a huge amount of the upfront work already, as in knowing things like where we needed to have stations, what the right alignment of what the project was, broadly speaking, what the budget would be, those sorts of things. Okay, so in that scenario, that works quite well, right? If you do it that way, the ministers can make an announcement at election time. You've done it. You've done the proper planning. You can deliver a good transport outcome. You do need to be on the front foot early on, though. There's no point in asking 3 months before the election, what project should we commit to? Because people aren't ready. And, typically it takes a bit of time to work out what the right thing should be. So you've got to be doing that work behind the scenes. You've then got other projects where, you've committed to a project perhaps in opposition or in the previous term of government, okay, and you need to show progress on the project. It's no good saying announcing the project. You've got to be showing, projects. Now, the thing I would say is that often you can show preliminary work being done, okay, that shows that the project is progressing without impacting on that, what the core project delivery needs to be. Okay, so you can show some early works being done without impacting on the time frame of the project, i.e., rushing the project and therefore having problems later on.
Yeah, so let's unpack that a little bit. So, you're working in the minister's office as someone who's been employed through political background. You have access to market research and political polling.
Yeah, and
you're looking at ways of identifying how can what you're being told in the political polling and the project status be matched together into something that can be announced. So what do you as advisor do with all of that information? So give us the party machine, activity in turning either a project or a promise into something that gets a media doorstop, or the minister with the hard hat making an announcement on progress.
Yeah. So the thing I would say is that there's a more broader political strategy for government, okay, about what it wants to be known for, okay, what its kind of key pillars are. So the government I was involved in, in New South Wales, one of the big things for that government was we are going to be a big building of infrastructure government, okay, and partly that was in opposition to the previous government with a different colour, who the perception was that they had not built much infrastructure. And so this was a kind of, let's get the infrastructure built, let's catch up on all the infrastructure that's been neglected, let's build the roads, the rail, the schools, the hospitals that we need for our city, right? So from that perspective, what you're looking for is activity. You want to be showing that you're delivering on that infrastructure promise that you've made to the electorate, okay? And we were lucky in that we had money because we had also gone to the election with an asset to recycle assets, and that was going to free up $20 billion, most of which was going to go into transport infrastructure, right? So there was lots of things that we had in the pipeline that we could announce on a regular basis at various stages of the project. New projects, tenders out, designs available then to put into the media. There's a tunnel boring machine now breaking through, or the tunnel boring machine has arrived in the harbour. There's a whole bunch of different points. And to be honest with you, we had so much going on. Our biggest challenge was actually deciding what not to share with the media, because we had more stories every week than we could possibly ever do. And so, it's kind of like, we were kids in candy stores in a way, and you're deciding which candy you don't want.
Well, is it which candy you don't want, or which candy has the bright shiny packaging that attracts the consumer? Because obviously, if you have this massive range of projects to pick from.
Sorry, just to be clear, these are all projects that were taking place anyway.
Yes. No.
Okay.
But
and it was just a question of the media stuff. But in terms of like the projects, we'd already to some extent, we already had a big pipeline of projects, and we were working out what the new projects were as well. Okay, to build that pipeline up.
But you have political polling, you get to see, you'll have media monitoring to see what's gaining traction with the community and voters. I'm guessing that's not, we increased frequency on this bus route from 1 bus an hour to 3 buses an hour. It's we're starting work on digging up this greenfield to build a brand new road to make your life easier.
No, I think there was a whole. So I think the way we looked at it was much more strategically about what. So let me wind the clock back. When we came in with a new minister and a new bunch of advisors, and very early on, what we wanted to do was we knew we needed to prioritize what to do. So what we did was we came up with a long list of all the things that we could do. Okay, and this wasn't like increase the number 33 bus service. It was things like focus on improving bus services, so increasing reliability, increasing frequency, those sorts of kind of aspects, and what and turning that into a kind of more strategic narrative about what we're doing in terms of buses, and then repeating that for rail and all those sorts of things. And so we came up with a very long list of the things that we could do. And then we prioritized ruthlessly to say, okay, there's just too many things there. What are the things we really, want to spend our energy and time doing? There's also then a whole bunch of things where you kind of go, well, the department needs to keep doing these things. We'll just let it kind of do BAU in this space. Okay. And it may be that it needed to be improved, but it wasn't a priority for the minister's office, and we had far too much on the agenda. So you're kind of going, okay, these are the things we're going to focus on. Right. So in our case, it was, we had 3 light rail projects. I can't remember how many metro projects it was. I think it started off as 3 metro projects, ended up by 6 or something by the end of the term. We did taxi, and point-to-point reform. So that was, incorporating Uber into a regulatory framework. There was fares reform that we decided to do as well. And there's some stuff our minister was very interested in, the potential of utilizing technology to improve the transport system as well. So we did a lot of stuff in sort of the tech space as well. We wanted to, we did end up doing more trains, more services, which was about improving the frequency and capacity of our rail network. There's a whole bunch, new ferries, there's new fleet. There was a whole bunch of stuff that we did. But it was prioritized, worked on, what we wanted to do and what we felt was the piece. It wasn't done as a kind of tactical, let's see, like I say, to focus on an individual bus route. Okay, but inevitably, bus projects or transport projects, there is a political overlay. Now, I think we were fortunate in that a lot of the political overlay also aligned with what was good policy. So
Yeah.
better transport connections in Western Sydney, which is very car dependent, but our public transport connections in Western Sydney, is both good policy and was good politics, because Western Sydney is also a major political battleground.
So it becomes we're looking out for you, voters, by delivering these things which are, on the face of it, not sexy, but they get traction. So you might not, if having been involved in bus network designs, the media will always find the people who are unhappy on day one of the new bus network, because they will go out to the bus stops and they'll ask for people. But if as part of that you're increasing the number and frequency of services for a wide range of people, are you getting that, oh, these people care about me, but it's more in the action of voting rather than in the public realm of media or social media or things like that?
Yeah, so in terms of things like the buses, you really want to understand what are the big positive messages and changes, and what are going to be the negative ones. So you should know those things well in advance, because well before implementation, when you're in the design stage and you're discussing it with the technical experts. And what you really want to be having is a narrative about why the changes are being made. Okay. And you also want to have had lots of discussion with stakeholders, political stakeholders, early on. Right? So buses are something that hits local politicians a lot.
Yeah.
And so, one of the things you want to be doing is understanding what are the political hot potato issues for buses, especially people on your political political party, because you're going to need support for those bus changes. And if you're coming up with a regime which is basically all of your colleagues don't understand what the changes are for, they get lots of complaints about them, they don't know how to explain them to the public, they are going to backlash against you. And we saw that we've seen that recently in some places. So you've got to be really smart about how you're going to communicate these changes and give the messaging right, explaining it to not just well before the public, explaining it to your colleagues, quite frankly. But what you're, as part of the design is you're looking at and understanding, okay, so this is going to be a winners, this is going to be the losers. How are we going to explain it to the losers? Is it going to fly politically? And the way I would just say on transport is, if you're trying to get 100%, it's the technocratic right solution.
Mm.
That's just not realistic. It's not the real world.
No, yeah.
Right. but if you're and this is the lens I would go with is, was it a significant improvement on what came before, i.e. 80% of the decisions you made around the bus route are the right decisions from a transport system perspective, and you had to make 20% of decisions for politically tactical reasons, that's a great result, right? It's not perfect from a transport system perspective, but actually, 80% of what you're trying to achieve, that's a very good, that's making, if you're saying, oh, that's not good, you're really making the perfect the enemy of the good. And that's not a place to be, not in a political world.
Yeah. So, but it's very much I suppose, getting back to the question. But the question is the value of lots of small scale under the radar things from a political perspective. So, which things gain more currency with the community? Is it the big shiny objects, or does improving the BAU such that people actually have a daily quality of life improvement, does one win over the other, or do you need both?
It's a really good question. It'd be very easy to say, well, you need both because you need everything, right? But we live in a world where you need to make priorities. Okay. Now, I would argue that do our transport systems typically need big headline projects, new metro, new light rail project, or do we need more smaller projects like more bus priority, more active transport, infrastructure? Now, I would say that we need a lot more of the latter rather than the former, because I think in a lot of places we're missing the core basic bus priority and active transport infrastructure that we need. Right? Yes. So from a transport system perspective, I would say that you need to do those things. Will give you more bang for your buck than a metro line, which typically will impact a relatively small percentage of a city. All right, but you will need both. In major cities, you will need to be able to do major rail lines as well. Right, but there's a sequencing thing, and I think one of the things I would say is, how do you fund both of those things? Well, I would go and have a look at the roads budget and say, well, are you getting bang for your buck on your roads? And typically not. Too much induced demand, creating capital projects on roads that don't deliver decent benefits. That's the money I'd reallocate to make sure that you can deliver both. Those bus priority and active transport projects at a local level, but while also delivering, major projects that are, city shaping headline projects as well. Whether that's a new metro, light rail, or all of the above.
So, okay, so this again is interesting. So, Wise Russell has given all of his newsletters to the new minister, and the new minister's gone, oh, you beauty, I get it now. Then that minister has to go and convince his colleagues about where the money should be spent. So, it's like, yes, I get that this corridor has problem on these roads, but the money might be better spent on a bus rapid transit system on that corridor. And the minister has to be able to convince their colleagues, the treasurer, the premier, the president, whoever they have to convince. But if they're not passionate about it, they may understand it, but if they're not passionate about it, how do they win over their colleagues to a change in direction?
It's a very good question, and I think one of the challenges if you're changing direction in a lot of our governance models. So if you want to change the transport system, right, and you're the minister for transport, you have to have support from your prime minister or your premier to make that change. So it's not just changing the mind of the minister. You've also got to explain, the change of mind to the prime minister or premier. And I think it's fair to say that prime ministers and premiers on transport are hit and miss as well, right? So some of them have been and I'm not just thinking in Australia, I'm thinking around the world. Some of them have been fantastic, say, advocates of walking and cycling, I'd give someone like Boris Johnson was a good example of someone who was big into cycling, and provided a lot of support for cycling. His successor, Rishi Sunak, was completely opposite. Same political party, very different views from the Prime Minister on active transport. So it is a difficult one. I think it's one of the reasons I think that the mayoral governance model for cities, where mayors are in charge of transport, and therefore ultimately are the only person that needs to be convinced from a political perspective, I think makes change in cities easier.
Yeah.
Right? Because
which is really interesting, because having worked closely with the mayor, you get to see how they have an impact. But then also, as is happening in Toronto at the moment, you have the province of the Ontario province government telling Toronto that you can't put in more bike lanes, or we're going to rip them out, as happened when I was at City of Sydney, and the bike lash aspect of it. And it's really, really interesting that, because mayors are close to the ground, and the higher up that you go in your governance structure, to state or province or regional, then to national governments, the less understanding of the concerns and needs of the community is, because you inherently have to be thinking at a much bigger picture.
Yeah, and the dynamic we're seeing in places like Canada, the US, Australia as well, is regional or suburban versus inner city.
Yeah.
Okay, and you see this in like Paris. So Mayor Anne Hidalgo has made significant changes to improve the amount of walking and cycling and prioritization of the non-car modes and sustainable transport in Paris.
Yeah.
For people in inner Paris, she's a hero. For people in outer Paris, who were historically used to driving into the center of Paris, not very popular at all.
No.
Right? And that dynamic is playing out in many places of people who live in the inner city don't want to have car dependency, but the people that they're preventing from using their cars in the inner city are people from the outskirts of the city. And that's creating a difficult political dynamic in many places.
Yeah.
I would say though that Paris has still made significant changes, as has London, because predominantly their mayors are in control of the transport systems for their entire city. So in Sydney's case, we don't have one mayor in charge of the whole of Sydney or in charge of the whole of Melbourne. We have lots of smaller councils, like the City of Sydney, who only have a small proportion of the city.
Yeah. Well, City of Sydney is like, I suppose, like the City of London, in that it's a constrained part of a much larger city, but it's where all the money is.
Yeah. So for those that don't understand, the City of London is basically a square mile. It's only a small proportion of London. Okay. It's one of the councils in London, right? Now it has a very high proportion of cyclists going through the City of London, and it's made a very big impact in that, in switching to prioritize that. But it's only a tiny proportion of London. There are 33 London boroughs, including the City of London, in London, but transport strategically is set by the mayor, and Transport for London as the department that supports him in delivering on that.
But the I suppose the comparison with the city of London is more about the financial strength of because the transport for London is really, or the London mayoralty is really a regional government in effect.
Yes, it is a regional government, but predominantly the mayor's powers are very limited, and overwhelmingly it's transport and policing more than anything else.
Yeah.
And urban planning as well.
Okay.
But so the governance models are important to reflect on, and how you get change as a result of that. Just going back in terms of the political thing, we touched on political advisors. One of the challenges I think we have is, even if we could become better at informing and advising ministers and their staff on transport policy, that still leaves a very large gap on the politics of transport, which they get no advice on, they get no training on, they get no support on. There is no formal mechanism for advising politicians and their political advisors on political strategy for transport. And so if you're looking to make change, that is actually really important. So effectively what we end up with is ministers and their offices are making the politics up as they go along, sometimes informed by some high profile examples, in other jurisdictions, but mostly not. So do they know how to get the most out of the public service? Possibly, but it's very hit and miss. Do they know how to implement bike lanes successfully with minimum political damage, or even getting the public on side for them? Maybe not. It's all very hit and miss. And so there's a whole bunch of stuff in there that for me is a big gap, because we don't invest in developing the political side of ministers and their advisors. And that's a problem.
So is this where, I suppose, lobby groups, professionals associations, industry groups, they have both a positive and a negative role to play in? Because the moment a minister gets in, everybody tries to get a meeting with the minister. And so you will have the bicycle advocacy group saying, Minister, we'd like to meet you. We want to tell you how wonderful cycling is, how good it is for the economy, it improves everybody's health. And you'll have the public transport industry group saying, Minister, buses are getting really old. You need to spend some money on updating them. We don't have enough drivers. They're all getting old. There's all these issues, and you'll have the industry groups who like building things saying, Minister, you haven't been spending enough on capital works. We're losing all our engineers and construction people overseas. If you want to change and go to an election with projects, well then we need to start doing things now.
Yeah.
So how do we educate ministers without them, I suppose, being educated by all the vested interests? And
so all the things you talked about there described are policy questions.
Yeah.
Right. And as I say, one of the things that I find you need to have in your department is your ducks in a row on policy. So you can provide good quality advice to ministers. So when whichever vested interest group comes up and says, Minister, we think you should be doing this, you've got a high quality senior policy advisor who's trusted by the minister and can say, Minister, this is our perspective on this is our advice around the policy, and this is why. Okay. And, discuss it with the minister and answer the questions, explain why they agree or disagree with what's being lobbied on, and etc. Right. So that for me is a vital role on the policy aspects of it and why it's so important to have good policy advisors within the public service. Not always present.
So,
but they're not getting, what they don't get is the political lens. There's no education on the political side of things. And the problem is that comes from, a lot of that comes from lobbyists of one sort or another. Right? So the lobbyist will say, oh, minister, this is, here's some polling that shows X, Y, and Z is really popular with constituents in these places. This is why you should be doing this particular project, etc., or, whatever. Okay. And there's no training of those of ministers in understanding and questioning those sorts of things. So it's a bit hit and miss, but in terms of how they think of these things from a political lens, and including their political advisors. And the challenge is, most of those political advisors will not be transport people either. Almost all of them will be non-transport people.
And they'll generally be people these days who have been in the party from early university days and have gone, started out volunteering, got a job in a local MP's office, then progressed their way up through the internal party politics.
Yeah, and the thing is, I would say is that can work out in different ways. So the strength of that model is these people do have a good political lens, which is really important advice for a minister. Okay, and so that's a really important aspect of what they have. The thing I would say is that is a problem is when what they do is they put politics before everything else. So they're not looking to do good policy; they're just looking to do good politics. And so everything becomes, a very political aspect rather than delivering on good policy. Right. So the best ministers, the best prime ministers have done both. They've made the politics work and they've made the policy work, good policy as well. Okay. I think far too many of our politicians, for various reasons these days, and their advisors get trapped in they're interested in the politics. They're not interested in good policy. So
how are they determining what's good politics when they don't have a background in the area? So a political advisor or a political staffer has a worldview that's aligned them to that minister, and then the bureaucracy or industry groups are saying, actually, this thing over here, we would really like this thing to happen. Do they just look through it through the lens of political polling and what the donors are saying, or so how do they determine what's good politics, and then say to the minister, well, yes, minister, I understand what the bureaucrats are saying to you, but this may not be good politically.
So if you're, depending on which political party you are, you will have some stakeholders that are your core voter base, okay, that you will want to keep happy. And you will also have some core swing voters that you will also want to be looking at how you can keep those people on the side as well. Okay, so if you're a party of the left, your typical stakeholders will be things like the trade unions, environmentalists, people fighting for social justice causes, or DEI causes, those sorts of things.
I thought DEI was dead.
apologise.
I'm joking. Don't cancel me.
I'm not going to go whether it is or it isn't. I'm just, but they'll have people, that will be, part of their lens, and so they'll be looking at people who are coming to them with, proposals that are aligned with their values for their core base. Okay, and they'll have a lens on people who are not strongly aligned, are more those floating voters. So in a lot of cases, these tend to be people that are focused on. So in Australia, it's often tradies that are seen as a significant swing voter.
Yeah.
Okay. And when John Howard was Prime Minister, he was very successful at winning those people over. And in recent times, Labour's been very good at winning those people over. And so that's why they form government. So, that's been one of the key sort of swing voter blocks. And so you do have a lens on those things, but I would say that in the transport case, there isn't. It's really about the story that you tell around the politics. It's not necessarily bike lanes are for the left and roads are for the people on the right. It's really about the story and the messaging you tell. As I say, there's plenty of conservatives who have supported public and active transport, okay, but they haven't necessarily done it for the same reasons that people of the left have. And I think one of the problems one of the challenges we have is that on good transport solutions, we often end up with certain groups of people only talking to people on the left about those transport solutions, and similarly on the right, rather than thinking about what's the right solution for the transport system and the benefits it brings. And actually, I find that the values that either people on the left have or on the right have, the solutions that you need are the same. It's just that the values that you are benefiting from, the same solution delivers multiple values benefits. So, you may believe in, using the transport system to increase productivity, which would be something that is typically a very big focus on the right. I would say, well, actually, to make your cities more productive, you want to be investing in, walking, cycling, and public transport. Okay. And if I was talking to people on the left who are interested in, equity and, say, the environment, my solution is the same. It's just that I've emphasized different values. Okay. I think that's true in the transport space, is that the solutions are normally, not always, but in the vast majority of cases, the right solutions can work for both politicians of the centre left and the centre right. It doesn't matter in terms of the values that you're sort of emphasizing are different for the different voter groups and different politicians, but the solutions are actually the same.
I think that's a really important point, because the technical aspects of a project will never sell it to anybody.
No,
the storytelling is what sells projects. People, if you have the ability to tell stories, and one of the reasons why personas are used a lot in project communications is, you're looking for that point of commonality. So if a technocrat goes into a discussion with a politician and says, it's good because it does X, Y, and Z. And if the X, Y, and Z isn't aligned with the politician's philosophy, if you have things that are A, B, and C that do align with the politician's philosophy, then doing that pre-work is really important.
Yeah, and this goes back to, you were talking about how do you build trust with your politicians if you're a public servant.
Yeah.
Okay. use the language of the politician, right?
Yeah, do your research.
Right? It's read the maiden speech of the politician. What's that? What are they passionate about? What are they interested about? Read their speeches. If they're were opposition transport minister, you should have been understanding all their speeches and understanding what's floating their boats and what they're talking about and their priorities and their values, so that when you're going them and talking to them about things that you're recommending, you can explain to them how they align with their priorities. That's the important thing. Whereas if you're going in and talking to them about how it aligns with the priorities of the other party, because that's what you've done, then that's going to be problematic. And the languages the languages are very different between the political parties. I remember one change of government I saw where one government was describing the people on public transport as its customers, and they were talking about customer focus. And the incoming government said, no, these are passengers, right? Now, I've written about how I don't think passengers is the right term, because it doesn't take into account people who are not actually, riding on the public transport system when you're trying to think about the whole system as a whole. So, if somebody is walking, they're not a passenger. You could argue they're a passenger of the pavement, but I think it's a bit crude. Similarly, if they're driving, they're a passenger of the road, sort of, but not really. Which is why I feel that passenger's too narrow. Customer, the reason the left often hates customer is because they see it as very commercial focused. But in terms of, are you providing a service when it's a kind of to the citizen, whether that's a good quality pavement for them to walk on, or a good quality bicycle lane, or a good quality road for them to drive on, or good quality public transport such as light rail, bus, etc. For me, that lens is where I got to, but you've got to use the language of the politician.
And I think another aspect that is good for bureaucrats is knowing when to park a project. So, using the Sydney context, which we talk about a lot, Northwest Rail Link, been around for 40 years as a project.
As a concept,
it
didn't take 40 years to build.
No, but it was there. It was promised. It was unpromised. It was then re-promised. Then a couple of times, and then was actually delivered. But when you and I've seen this, and one of the good things about having long-term public servants is they may get discouraged if a good project gets cancelled for political reasons. But there was always a concept of a bottom drawer. We'll just put that in the bottom drawer till the circumstances change. The minister may have a need to address something in that area, or there might be a change of minister or a change of government, and then suddenly when they're looking for ideas, you can say, well, actually, we've got this good project which we've had sitting here, but we don't have that ability so much anymore because we don't have tenure of people who really understand the long-term needs. Not at the senior levels, at the lower levels, you have people who, will have projects that they keep working away on, but you don't have that. And so there's, I suppose, two aspects. One is people not going, okay, well, actually it's time to pull back from this project because we need to be reading the political tea leaves.
Yeah. Doesn't have political
of what's happening. But then also having that, well, we will put it aside, but we'll remember it, and when there's a suitable opportunity to bring it back forward.
So the thing we talked earlier about, how do you build trust? And one of the things I would say is coming to the minister with a new minister, which was the example we were using, of a bunch of things that are wins for the minister that they can deliver. Okay, and do. And that can be a whole range of things. Sometimes it's new projects, sometimes it's technology stuff. Sometimes it could be policy change. There's a whole bunch of stuff in that space where you can kind of go to the minister that there's a whole bunch of things in here we think you might be interested in doing based on your research with them, understanding the problems that they have politically, and the opportunities that are there. And yeah, some of those things should be things that have been perhaps in the bottom drawer where there is a window of opportunity to offer it to a minister. Yeah. Where it's now, the window of opportunity, the Overton window for this project has opened. And so now is an opportunity to step through it. That for me would be a very good way of helping to build that relationship with the minister, in that they can see that you're on their side and that there's a whole bunch of things that they are trying to help you with in terms of, here's some options for you to deliver on them. And that can be, in a whole range of areas. So, we talked about commuter car parks, for example. And, so one of the challenges could be, I've got a local MP who is, unhappy with the lack of parking in a local station. And it may be that expanding the commuter car park is not on the table for various reasons. It might be too expensive. There could be constraints on land, whatever it is, right? And actually the right answer might then be, what we need to do? We need to really improve the links to the station, more frequent bus services and better active transport links, or it could be pricing the car park even, right? Or, prioritizing the car park in a different way. Coming forward with the minister for saying, look, minister, here's a problem here. We think we can come up with some solutions that we want to talk about with you. And there are some options here. Yeah.
And that can be a way to introduce those things that haven't, that may not have been acceptable. And in fact, in Sydney, very much case in point with North West Rail, the media is now agitating around this 250% parking demand for the massive commuter car parks that they've built, which is an obvious sign of a failure of the rest of the planning, land use planning and the transport system to get people housing and public and active transport where they can get to the stations without actually having to rely on their car, which I think is a good point for us to end today. So I think what we've discovered is it's actually a two-way piece of education. Bureaucrats need a good dose of education on politics, and the politicians need a good dose of education on transport.
I wouldn't quite phrase it as the bureaucrats need a dose of education on the politics with a big P, but I think they do need to be smart about how they build relationships with and communicate with politicians and their advisors. Political awareness is useful, but it's not their role to play politics with a big P.
No, I'm not suggesting that they insert themselves into the political process, but having that understanding of it.
Yeah.
So that
they need to understand the constraints the minister is under.
Yeah. Well, great. Well, that was very enlightening for me. Having always been someone on the other side of the process. So thank you, Ross.
No problem, Graham. As always, it was great to talk to you. And for those in our audience, if you have liked what you've heard today, please like, subscribe, offer us a cup of, what is it, a train trip? Is it
buy us a bus ticket or a train ticket on page.
Bus ticket or a train ticket, fantastic. Love the public transport stuff.
Yeah, and and we will be. I don't know. I was going to say we'll see you next week, but I'll see you next week.
Yes, you'll see me next week, and we will hopefully see our audience again soon. So thank you very much for watching and listening.